Good afternoon. I'm here with Minister of Justice Kaycee Madu to make an important announcement about Alberta's effort to fight back for this province and get a fair deal in the Federation. Yesterday, oral arguments began in front of Alberta's Appeal Court on our constitutional challenge to the Trudeau government's No More Pipelines Law, Bill C-69, also known as the Federal Environmental Assessment Act. In the last Alberta election, I promised to Albertans that we would file this constitutional challenge to do everything within our power to fight back against what we believe is an illegal invasion of Alberta's exclusive authority under the Constitution to regulate the development of our own natural resources, a critical, hard-fought victory that was hardwired into the Canadian Constitution in 1982. We filed our application for a judicial reference to the Alberta Appeal Court last September, and I'm pleased that our lawyers are in court today, together with those from Saskatchewan and Ontario and Woodland Cree First Nation, the Indian Resource Council, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, the Explorers and Producers of Canada, the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, the Independent Contractors and Business Association, the Alberta Enterprise Group, and the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, all together to stand up for jobs and the economy here in Alberta, to stand up for our largest industry, Alberta's oil and gas industry, and to stand up for the Canadian Constitution and our province's exclusive authority to regulate our resources. So that was a promise we made to Albertans in the last election. Promise made, promise kept. This is part of Bill C-69 is part of a series of federal policies that have attacked our vital economic interests and killed jobs and growth here in Alberta and other parts of Canada, like the cancellation of the Northern Gateway Pipeline by the Trudeau government in 2015 with the acquiescence of the then Alberta government, the killing of the Energy East project through new regulations that illegally sought to regulate pipelines on the basis of upstream emissions associated with them, clearly a violation of Section 92A of the Constitution. The plan to increase the job-killing carbon tax to $170 a ton, putting our industry and our whole economy at an uncompetitive advantage, particularly in this trade-exposed industry that competes with jurisdictions and producers that don't have taxes like that. The new clean fuel standard and so many more regulations that keep layering cost on cost on cost, making it harder for our largest industry to succeed. And of course, the federal government folding on Keystone XL, both with the Obama administration's veto of it in 2015, as well as the Biden administration's veto last month, where the federal government didn't even pretend to put up a fight. I understand that based on briefings from the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Trudeau does not even plan to raise specifically the outrageous cancellation of Keystone XL by President Biden, a clear violation of the investor protection provisions of the North America Free Trade Agreement, and a slap in the face for this, the United States' closest ally and trading partner. And that is why our government was elected with a mandate to fight back, to fight for a fair deal. That's what we did in keeping our commitment to sue the federal government over its retail carbon tax that punishes ordinary people for living normal lives, for driving to work, for heating their homes, for filling up their gas tanks. We did so through Alberta's constitutional reference to the Alberta Appeal Court on the carbon tax, where we were supported, of course, by several fellow Canadian provinces, and won an historic and critical victory, a 4-1 victory at Alberta's Appeal Court, in which the majority ruled that the federal carbon tax constituted, quotes, a constitutional Trojan horse, unquotes, violating our province's jurisdiction. So I want to thank 9 of the Canadian provinces for having supported Alberta's leadership in fighting Bill C-69 when it was before the federal parliament in 2019. I want to thank the majority of Canadian senators from different party backgrounds for having fundamentally rewritten the bill because it was so unbalanced, unreasonable, and unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the Trudeau government sent it back to the House of Commons and reimposed the job-killing and constitutional violations of the original version. I want to thank the many interveners, including those from First Nations and amongst job creators, who are supporting our constitutional challenge. Why is this, as I mentioned, we're also, in terms of fighting back, we've also filed, excuse me, not filed, but funded, I should say, a constitutional challenge of the federal tanker ban, Bill C-48, which we're doing so through the Alberta Indigenous Legal Defence Fund, another commitment we made in the last election to support a stronger legal voice for pro-resource development First Nations. And I want to thank our partners who are in our First Nations who are taking that to court to say that it is unfair and it is wrong for the federal government to single out one single product, bitumen, produced in only one province, Alberta, for export off of one of our coasts, the west coast of Canada. Why is today's constitutional challenge of the No More Pipelines law so important? Well, first of all, because it's about jobs and the economy. What it does is to create even more investor uncertainty. A growing body of economic research has demonstrated the huge flight of capital of job-creating investment from Canada's economy. We saw that especially here in Alberta after 2015. And one of the reasons for it is red tape and investor uncertainty and endless delays in major projects like pipeline projects created by laws like this. Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, makes that even worse. It was hard enough to get projects approved, to build big things, to create jobs, to attract investment under the previous law. And now with a law that in a process that the federal government can stop at any time for any reason at the whim of federal ministers, they have effectively politicized the process, and that creates investor uncertainty. And companies and investors have no idea how long the approvals process might last on a project. We saw that last year under the new Environmental Assessment Act, Bill C-69, with respect to the Frontier Tech mine. They walked away from a prospective $7 billion investment that would have created thousands of jobs exactly because of that uncertainty and because of foreseeable delays. So, one reason why we are keeping our election commitment to be in court today, suing the federal government over the No More Pipelines law, is jobs and the economy. But another critical reason is that we are standing up for our exclusive power under Canada's Constitution to develop our resources. Back in 1981 and 82, when Premier Peter Lougheed was fighting the National Energy Program, the federal government was also seeking to patriate and change Canada's Constitution. Our then Premier made it clear that Alberta would not sign its consent to a new Constitution unless there was explicit protection for our power over our resources, the resources that belong to the women and men of Alberta. And so that is why he secured Section 92(1)(a) in Canada's Constitution in 1982, the most important legal and political victory for this province since the Natural Resource Transfer Act of 1932 under Premier Brownlee. Section 92(a) as our lawyers are pointing out at the Alberta Appeal Court today and throughout the week, says, quotes, in each province, the legislature may exclusively make laws in relation to A, exploration for non-renewable natural resources in the province, and B, development, conservation, and management of non-renewable natural resources and forestry resources in the province, including laws in relation to the rate of primary production therefrom. So that is the law of the land. That is the supreme law of the land. That law has paramountcy over Bill C-69 or any other federal statute law. This was a conditioned precedent of Alberta signing the Constitution. Had it not been for this provision, Premier Lougheed, like Premier Lévesque, would not have signed the Constitution in 1982. It would not have had Alberta's consent. And so we are in court today to defend this critical victory, this essential power that underscores Alberta's ownership of its resources, the benefit of which we have shared with our fellow Canadians for decades. Bill C-69 seeks clearly to violate Section 92(1)(a) of the Constitution because it gives the federal government the power to step in and regulate right over top of us with respect to resource production. It is a regime which imposes a review in areas where there is no basis of federal jurisdiction. It takes projects without a required federal decision or tangible connection to a federal power, and it subjects them to an expensive review through a federal-only lens focused on federal priorities and federal choices, and then using these priorities to decide whether the project should proceed, irrespective of a meaningful independent federal duty over it. So the arguments going on here in Edmonton right now before the Alberta Appeal Court are of historic importance, and we will look forward to, of course, the decision, which we expect in a few months' time, just as we continue to fight on every front for the economic future of this province. And with that, I'm happy, as is Minister Madu, to take questions.
Thank you. Now we will go to the phones. If we can just ask you to limit yourself to one question, we'll get to as many as possible today. Operator, can you please put through our first caller?
Emma Greeny, Globe and Mail.
Yeah, g'day. This question is actually for the Premier. Obviously, we've got budget on Thursday. Hooray. You earlier on talked about a fiscal reckoning for Alberta. How much of that will we actually see on Thursday? Like, how bad is the projected deficit going to be? Is it going to be more than $14 billion? And then on a related note, of course, oil prices are actually up and forecasts are not looking as horrible as they were. So how optimistic are you on that front in terms of resource revenues for Alberta? Cheers.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I thank you, Emma. I first used that reference of fiscal reckoning in my televised address to Albertans about the pandemic and the economic crisis in April of last year. And I was saying that with the collapse in the global economy, the massive collapse in Alberta's revenues, and the huge expenditures that we have, the huge spending we have to do to protect people in the economy, that fund the healthcare system, that there would be a fiscal reckoning in the future. And that remains the case because, as you know, we inherited a deficit in the range of $7.5 billion from the previous government. We embarked on a prudent course to bring balance back to Alberta's finances over the term of this government by getting our spending down to the average amongst Canadian provinces, which represented a 2.8% reduction in program spending. And then we got sideswiped by the triple black swan of the pandemic, the global recession, the energy price collapse. And so, as you know, at the worst of it, in the second quarter of last year, we were projecting a deficit for the fiscal year 2021 in the range of $24–25 billion. Thankfully, with some recovery, significant recovery in energy prices, our revised projection has come down in our last quarterly report to about $14 billion. You'll have to wait and see on Thursday for our final projection for the fiscal year that's about to end, but it'll be in that range. It'll be in that range. In terms of, and let me say, our focus in this budget is investing in healthcare and jobs. It's protecting lives and livelihoods. As much as I hate deficits, now would be the worst time to cut billions of additional dollars in spending when we need it in healthcare and we need it to help stimulate economic growth. This is exactly the time that I think people across the political spectrum broadly agree that this is exactly the time that government needs to step up and make targeted investments. In our case, investments in the pandemic health response, healthcare generally, but also efforts to further diversify Alberta's economy and create jobs. So that is our focus during this crisis. As we emerge from it, you will see continued efforts by Alberta's government to operate more efficiently. And that will be a kind of sub-theme of Thursday's budget as we continue gradually to strive to be as efficient as other governments. So when we get out of the crisis and get back to some decent growth, we then have a chance of getting a good chance of getting our financial house in order, over the next few years. But as the Minister Tays has said, that's really become not an immediate objective because that would not be realistic, but rather a midterm goal, which we think is realistic. In terms of oil prices, you're right. I was very happy yesterday to see Western Canada Select click past $50 and WTI past 65. We have seen some projections of strong energy prices in the latter half of this year. I mean, even stronger prices. And gosh knows, I hope that is true, but it would be irresponsible to plan for that. So you will see quite conservative projections for commodity prices in Thursday's budget. And in fact, I think slightly below the private sector forecasting average, because we think that's the prudent thing to do. Alberta governments of different stripes have often been criticized for trying to project their way out of deficit. We will not be making that mistake. We will be very cautious on projecting revenues, and any incremental revenues that might come to Alberta through unexpectedly high energy prices will be very helpful in reducing the deficit and reducing the projected increase in debt. Sorry, that was a very long answer. I apologize.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Penny Trenton, Kicks FM.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is, well, I guess for either who could answer this for me, and that's in terms of timeline. So, Premier, you were mentioning that they're in court as we speak now, kind of like the carbon tax battle. We know that eventually got appealed to the federal court, and that's we're still waiting for a result on that. So my question is, how long do you expect that this is going to take to go through the legal system? And probably, as we saw with the carbon tax, are you expecting an appeal?
I think we anticipate, Minister Madu, typically about 6 months before the Alberta Appeal Court would render its judgment. That's about how much time they took on our carbon tax reference last year, which we ultimately won on a 4-1 vote in February. So about a year ago this week. So we're expecting about a 6-month timeline on that. And I'll invite Minister Madu to give us an update on when we can expect a judgment from the Supreme Court of Canada on the carbon tax. I think it's supposed to be in March. Finally, I would expect that this will end up at this constitutional challenge of Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, will be appealed one way or another to the Supreme Court of Canada. Should we not succeed, we would absolutely intend to appeal it, and I'm quite sure our allies would be there with us. And if we are successful, then I anticipate the federal government would seek to appeal it to the Supreme Court of Canada. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, Premier, I think you have essentially covered the time frame for this sort of appeals. As you know, Kenny, the argument began at the Alberta Court of Appeal on February 22nd. It would go all the way till the 25th. And as the Premier rightly said, it will take about 6 months for the court to be able to deliver its judgment. We anticipate that at the conclusion of the appeal hearing, it will be reserved. Depending on the outcome of that proceeding, then obviously we would then make a determination as to whether or not we need to appeal to the Supreme Court if we are not successful. Obviously, if we are successful, I think that would be a welcome development for Alberta.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
David Staples, Edmonton Journal.
Hi, Mr. Premier. My question is on the coming budget. So when you were elected, it was on the promise of balancing the budget. And you're talking about that as a midterm goal. So I'm wondering where you are in your thinking in that. But you talked about a new kind of promise, a new idea of not going above 30% debt to GDP ratio. Why do you have this new marker? What's the purpose of it? And how can you make that stick if it's just legislation? Will it be an effective thing to control spending?
Sure. Well, thanks, Dave. Just to refer back to my earlier answer to Emma, with the look, as a result of COVID, Alberta's government revenues collapsed by 25%, by 1/4. And while that has abated in recent months because of recovery in energy prices, we have still lost several billion dollars in revenues that we were banking on. And look, this wasn't because of wildly optimistic projections. We were right on the industry average for projecting commodity prices and economic growth last year. It's because the whole world was sideswiped by the biggest economic collapse in 90 years, and we had the Russian energy price war. So I just want to underscore this. The day that Minister Toews delivered last year's budget, I believe, I could stand to be corrected on the exact figure, but I believe WTI was trading at over $71 a barrel. By mid-April, early mid-April, we were selling WTI on the futures market at minus $20, a $90 turnaround in the wrong direction. So this was a total collapse. I mean, we were looking through the first half of this fiscal year at virtually zero royalty revenue. At the same time, we've had to spend billions more on healthcare, first and foremost, for pandemic response, but also billions more on economic recovery, surging capital spending to create jobs, doing things like adding money and nearly $250 million into the Alberta Enterprise Corporation to kickstart venture capital for diversification in the innovation sector, $800 million in modernizing Alberta's irrigation system to have a strong future for agriculture, so much more. So we've made strategic investments on the side of economic diversification, necessary spending on the side of healthcare and pandemic response. Add all of that up, and it becomes effectively impossible without massive spending cuts right now to get back to balance, or massive tax increases, either of which would hurt the economy when the economy needs help. And so that's why we've had to just face reality, not fight against reality, not tilt at fiscal windmills, but just face up to it. The reality is, with what we've been handed by COVID, we cannot realistically balance the budget in the next 2 years. But I think we can make meaningful progress if we continue to hold the line on spending, which is what we've done. We don't get a lot of credit for this. We get attacked for various difficult decisions. But it's been a long time since an Alberta government had the willingness on some things to say no, so that we could say yes to a sustainable fiscal future. And so you'll see that in the budget on Thursday, which is to say ongoing spending restraint. That will be an aspect of our position in collective bargaining with the big government unions throughout the course of this year. And so you ask then, why have we come up with the 30% debt to GDP ratio? Well, in the spring, summer, when we were kind of coping with this crazy, unpredicted new fiscal reality, we turned to a lot of very wise outside advisors, including our Economic Recovery Council that we put in place back in March, chaired by Dr. Jack Mintz. And he and that council recommended that, I mean, they saw the same stark reality we did. They saw that balance in this term was effectively impossible. And they said, but you've got to have some hard fiscal targets that you will stick to. And on this, I mean, they referenced Paul Martin in 1995, his famous statement, come hell or high water, that the Chrétien government of the time would stick to its targets. For us, very important to signal to Albertans and to investors, to bond markets, that we have very solid targets, or what you call fiscal anchors, that will not move. That is to say, yes, we'll be borrowing. Yes, we'll be spending on healthcare and investing in the economy, but no, we will not do that recklessly. And so we fixed a target of 30% debt to GDP ratio. We now have a tax-supported debt in the range of, I think, $85 billion. So that gives us a bit of running room. You'll see in the budget on Thursday, we think we can maintain that target. We think it's a credible target. We think it speaks to the concerns of bond rating agencies, hopefully to avoid downgrades and to enhance confidence in our fiscal management. It also is, I'll close with this. It's an important signal for investors. This is something that my friends on the political left, I don't think, adequately appreciate. But if you just let her rip on the fiscal side and just, as we're being told by the opposition, just forget that fiscal discipline matters at all. If you just run massive, endless, huge deficits, say north of $10 billion, what that says to investors that you're trying to attract to the province to create jobs is that there are major tax increases coming down the future, and that the province's whole fiscal and economic policy is unpredictable because it will be burdened by big debt. So that's why the fiscal anchor is important, to show that, yes, there's borrowing happening now, but we will restore the health of the province's finances.
We have time for 3 more questions. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC.
Hi, Premier. On Saturday, a group of racists demonstrated in front of the legislature and walked around the capital city bearing tiki torches, which experts agree are symbols tied to white supremacy. Between Saturday and Monday, you or staffers who handle your Twitter account tweeted or retweeted on 18 different occasions at least. You didn't condemn Saturday's event until Monday afternoon, after at least one journalist reached out to your office to obtain a statement. Why didn't you deem it a priority to condemn white supremacists sooner, of your own volition? And when you did get around to it, why did you not post your text to Facebook as well?
Well, Rafi, first of all, I don't make a habit of attacking protests that are organized to attack me. I think that sometimes just adds fuel to the fire. And that was a protest of people calling me a dictator and calling me a fascist and all sorts of names. And so, as a general rule, I don't think it's prudent to kind of feed into that frenzy. And people, as I've said, that we have a freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, which people have used. Now, I do believe there are Albertans out there who are opposed to our public health measures that are designed to protect lives and our healthcare system. I think there are people who oppose those views that have no affiliation with or hate groups and are not in any way bigoted. And I think we need to be mindful of that. But on Monday, when we received a media inquiry, we looked more closely at the event and found that they had used an image of the apparently of the Charlottesville, 2017 Hate Fest, which was clearly a white supremacist event in the United States. And on further investigation, found that a number of people who had promoted the event were notoriously involved in spreading hatred, and that indeed people who attended, there's evidence that people who attended the event had affiliations with groups like so-called Soldiers of Odin and the Urban Infidels. Where the heck these groups come from, I do not know. And so we received a media request on Monday morning. We issued a statement on Monday afternoon. So as I've always said, Albertans, I believe the overwhelming majority of Albertans believe in human dignity, in the equality of all before the law, reject hatred, and organizations that promote it, as well as their symbols. As I've said, if there were people at that rally on Saturday who were just there to protest public health measures that they disagree and were unaware of some of these affiliations, then I believe they have a responsibility to condemn those groups, to condemn those symbols, and disassociate themselves from those extremists and those forces of hatred.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Graham Thompson, iPolitics.
Well, hi, Premier. Thanks for taking the question. Quick question. It's a follow-up about the budget on Thursday. You'll be jumping right into the budget. There's no sort of start of a new session, and there's no throne speech. Why not have a throne speech to, outline your feelings of what's going on right now and actually set up your government's agenda for the coming session in the coming year?
A fair question, Graham, and thank you for it. So the answer is a couple of points. Firstly, just logistically, the ceremonial aspects of doing a throne speech are very complex because of COVID restrictions. So as you know, we have to have a very limited presence of members in the House. And so most of the fanfare normally associated with the throne speech would be extremely difficult to do logistically in a COVID-safe way. Secondly, many of the bills that, as you know, our legislative agenda was sideswiped, like so many other things, by the pandemic. So a number of the bills that the Lieutenant Governor announced in last year's throne speech did not get tabled or moved through the legislature because we had periods when House sittings were interrupted largely due to COVID. So in other words, a number of the bills that we'll be introducing in this spring session were actually already announced in a throne speech. So we didn't have a normal legislative year in that respect. And thirdly, Graham, I think, we are hopefully in the last quarter of this pandemic, and I think people's minds, are just focused overwhelmingly on getting through the pandemic, on the immediate challenges that we face. And I think there will be a natural time for all of us to post-pandemic, in a sense, hit the reset button. So that's why we anticipate doing a throne speech in the fall. Please God, we will have had adequate doses of vaccines, and with weather and other factors, we'll be well past the worst of the pandemic, and we can move forward on a whole lot of other issues that are not pandemic related. But I just think right now, for both logistical reasons and just the general mood of the public, is not the right time to be talking about a whole lot of other issues that are not pandemic related.
Operator, can you please put through our final caller?
Audrey Nouveau, Radio Canada.
Hi, Premier. I have a question in English and in French for you today concerning the your court challenge of Bill C-69. Why are you doing a press conference today? We don't have a decision yet, and usually you shy away from publicly commenting when the matters are before courts like they are right now. So what do you hope to achieve today?
Tout d'abord, ce n'est pas une question criminelle, c'est une question constitutionnelle. Et également, c'est une question politique. Évidemment, c'est un engagement électoral que nous avons fait dans les dernières élections albertaines. Et alors, je veux souligner pour les Albertains que le gouvernement garde notre promesse à cet égard avec cet défi envers le gouvernement fédéral. C'est essentiel parce que ça touche à notre économie, aux emplois en Alberta. Évidemment, notre économie était le plus affectée le plus profondément dans la récession de COVID-19 parce que notre économie était déjà faible auparavant, en partie à cause des politiques fédérales comme le projet de loi C-69. Alors, pour moi, c'est une question à défendre les intérêts économiques essentiels de cette province et nos pouvoirs garantis dans la Constitution du Canada. René Lévesque a refusé à signer la Constitution en 82 et Peter Lougheed a signé la Constitution seulement parce que le fédéral a ajouté une reconnaissance de pouvoir exclusive des provinces à gérer leurs propres ressources. Et ça, c'est la raison pour laquelle nous sommes en cours aujourd'hui, dans la Cour aujourd'hui, pour défendre ce pouvoir essentiel, constitutionnel. C'est une promesse que nous avons faite, c'est une promesse que nous gardons aujourd'hui. Thank you very much.